توزيع الدرجات من 8 grade. واضح؟
واضح.
فإن شاء الله زي ما ذكرت هذا الكونتنت أو الأسسمنت فايل not included in our course content فقط للإجابة عن هذا الأسسمنت. So that's why the lecture is number 3 and 14 لأن 12 بتكون في الأسسمنت. طيب بسم الله نبدأ في الليكتشر 13 and 14 ونشوف إيش أهدافنا اليوم وإيش الobjective for today lecture. Today we will identify the waste method and how can we dispose the chemical or handling the chemical in our laboratory. فوصلنا إلى نهاية السيفتي رولز بالويست مانجمنت وكيف نقدر نتخلص من الكيميكالز بطرق أكثر أمناً أو the safest way possible. Also, we will identify and knowing about storing for the chemicals, especially the corrosive chemical. How can we store this corrosive solution? Is the shelves has certain type of material that's made of. فبنشوف اليوم إن شاء الله. Also, how can we protect the environment? Why we do all this waste procedure? Because we want to protect our environment as possible as we can. The next file, the lecture number 14, is about chemical management, also part 2. So it's about the appropriate waste disposal and the important how can we waste الكيميكال والترانسفيرنج أو الشيبينج للكيميكال بطريقة أكثر أمناً. Finally, we can distinguish between a laboratory safety and the laboratory security. This two terminology, what does that mean? Laboratory security, is it different than laboratory safety? So we will see today إن شاء الله. فلو نشوف مع بعض الليكتشر نبدأ. So this is the assessment file on week 12 and this number 13. Chemical management, storage, waste, and security. When we start to talk about chemical waste, the first thing that comes in my mind is when we dispose the solution into the sink of the bench. This is the first thing that we do in a chemical waste as a laboratory or inductory laboratory or as a chemist or a student. أول إجراء ممكن تساهمون فيه في التخلص من النفايات يكون تخلصكم من السولوشن في السينك أو الwater sink in the bench. This is the simplest way. But this sink has what? Appropriate way to use it. Not all the solution can be poured in this water sink unless specifically you are an instructor to do and it is safe to waste in this water sink. There are strong acid and strong bases react and oxidant and reactant react. So when we pour the solution into the sink, some particularly well-known example of never down the sink, precaution, chemicals, you do not allowed to pour it into the sink is البيروكلوريت and we checked that in the previous lecture, why the perchlorate are so hazardous. Also, the salt of azodized that can form explosive compound with metal cation, or the material of this sink. Sulfides and cyanides also are not allowed to pour it into the sink because it will form poisonous gases in contact with acid. Also, disposing of solid chemical is not allowed to pour it into the sink. ففي حال كان في مادة صلبة, you must dispose that. How? In the container of waste in the lab. Waste disposal costs money. That's why some majority didn't apply this procedure or waste the chemicals in the appropriate way, because some waste can be recycled by a waste disposal firm, and these wastes will be the cheapest to handle. Other waste can be processed, and this process costs money to do it. And you will therefore cost more to disposal of some can that can be incident or indicate. Yes, عذرا للمقاطعة. We're back again to why waste are difficult to do it. Again, because some waste can be processed with cost of money, so you will cost so large amount of money to just disposal a non-benefit chemicals. Also, many waste must simply be cured in special containers that are placed in special landfills. This is very expensive, this waste procedure, and in long run, it's not desirable solution. Simply, we will apply this general guideline that will remind us about how can we dispose of the chemical. It's a repeated information. بعض من هذه rules we discussed it previously in the previous week. Who carried the general guideline? Yes? No one to read? Yes, who can read? Don't pour anything.
أنا بقرأ.
Yes, Jude, Noura, yes, start.
Don't pour anything down the sink unless you are instructed to do so.
Yes.
Some solutions can be poured down the sink, and some solids can be placed in ordinary trash. Can be, but this determination will be made by your instructor, not you.
Things that becomes connected with the chemical include paper towels, soapings, or entire paper must be treated. Politely ask your instructor what to do.
Excellent. Broken glassware that is contaminated with any chemical must what? Be handled by someone else. Ordinary glassware that is broken and clean should be placed in a special receptacle for broken glass container. Handling broken glass can be dangerous, and it's best to have a teaching assistant or an instructor to take care of these broken glasses. Most waste will have specific waste jar that available to receive the waste of chemical. Read the label carefully and dispose of the chemical in the right receptacle, not in the wrong one. Don't mix waste unless specifically told to do so. There are some situations where it's both safe and no more costly than separated waste. However, unmixing chemical is generally expensive and something quite difficult. So separating the waste costs money also to so many laboratory. Next part is about corrosive chemical storage. We talk about the second objective for today. How can we store a corrosive chemical and flammable liquid? We know about the definition of corrosive in the previous lecture. Common in organic acid include hydrochloric acid, sulfuric acid, and nitric acid, classified as corrosive. Also, flammable liquids such as commonly sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, ammonium hydroxide, it's organic solvent, and flammable liquid such as methanol, acetone, hexane, ethyl acetate, it's all classified as flammable liquid. While we are knowing about the hazards of this corrosive and flammable liquid, we should know how to manage to store this chemical in the appropriate cabinets that are made of specific materials. In a store, we want to keep this chemical separated. This is important tip, so that there will not be incidental bump of bottles that might break the container and cause this chemical to mix together and react. So this is number one rule in storage. So the first step in storing corrosive is to separate acid from bases. We will also learn about the separation. Let's see together the cabinet of the corrosive chemical. What should it be made of? Cabinet made of metal are not best for corrosive chemicals. Why? Because the acids react with metals. However, metal cabinets are sometimes painted with a corrosion-resistant paint that to protect the metal to form or to act with the acid attack, but it is still not the best choice to use when we are storing a corrosive chemical. Most cabinets for corrosive are made of a heavy molded plastic. It's called polyethylene or wood. Polyethylene cabinets are especially good since they can be made seamless and can contain spills from broken or cracked bottles. Also, wooden cabinets for corrosive chemical are common. However, wood is not always the best choice since some acids can react with wood. It is corrosive chemical, so it will react with wood sometimes. So that's why some cabinets of wood are painted with polyurethane to provide a protective layer or a protective barriers to minimize the contact between the acid and the wood. But the best choice is what? The cabinet made with plastic polyethylene, molded plastic. We talk about the separation. So acids are separated from bases in each cabinet. Organic acid or a chemical must be also not be stored next to inorganic acid, which are often oxidizer. So don't store acetic acid, this organic acid, next to flammable solution or in a flammable cabinet. Also, nitric acid is a strong oxidizing, as we know, so it will react fastly with organic such as acetic acid. So while you are storing the nitric acid, it must be separated. Sodium and potassium hydroxide can be stored with ammonium hydroxide in a separated cabinet. If hydrochloric acid and ammonium hydroxide are stored near to each other, that will often what? Covered with a fine white solid to limited the reaction of two gases. So if we are in case that hydrochloric acid next to ammonium hydroxide, they will be covered with a fine white solid to prevent their reaction from their gases, the two gases that are generated from hydrochloric acid with ammonium hydroxide. Flammable liquid, we finished the corrosive part. What about flammable liquids such as acetone, alcohol in general? The storage cabinets for flammable liquid are made of double-walled steel with tight fitting joints that are welded or riveted. The bottom is designed to catch a spill and doors may be self-close and self-latching. A 3-point latch is usually used. So, the flammable liquid cabinet is made of double-walled steel and a tight-fitting joint that are self-closing because it is a flammable liquid, hazardous, and it must be always be in a closed environment. The volume of flammables in the laboratory is limited by the fire code. The higher the fire rating, the larger the volume of flammable allowed. فاحتواء اللابراتوري للمواد الفلامبل أو القابلة للاشتعال يعتمد على الفاير كود أو الريتنج للفاير لهذا اللابراتوري. فإذا كان الفاير rating is higher, so we can contain or have a large amount of this flammable chemical. Okay, let's see this activity. Each group should choose one tube, then tell us what is the wrong with the picture. Choose one test tube, and then we will see the picture of each tube. Who can start? Yes, with this exercise. بتول, أمل, ألاء.
أنا.
Yes, Abir, choose a tube.
Number 1.
Okay, this is tube number 1 with this chemist. What's the wrong with this picture? Or the safety rules that didn't applied by this chemist. What's the wrong? Yes.
أنا قاعد شم المادة، هذا خطر.
ممتاز يا عبير، شوق الهنوف. الغازز الاكسبوجر اللي قاعد يصير هنا اللي هو الانهيليشن. So this chemist inhaled the gases which is correctly and precautions وممنوع يتم التصرف بهذا الشكل في اللاب. The second tube. What's the wrong with the second tube?
العمل بدون قفاز ولبس النظارة.
ممتاز. So number 1, protective equipment.
And without the glass protection.
Yeah, without the goggles. أيضا.
هذه اللي زي الملقط حق الأنابيب.
وين؟
إنه يمسك الأنبوبة بيده.
ممتاز.
Without eye protection.
Without eye goggles. ممتاز. Also, you can check the bench. The environment that this chemist in.
إنه ما مرتب.
Yes, and we discussed that in the previous lecture. لازم يكون uncluttered, organized, سواء كان في الفيوم هات أو either بالبنش. لاحظوا it's a lot of equipment and flask والtubes. ممتاز. Okay, third tube.
Not safe, but she is not wearing gloves.
Yes.
And she's not wearing a lab coat.
صحيح سكينة، كوثر، جود, not wearing the lab coat. Or she handled the tube directly without gloves. And just only the goggles. ممتاز.
She's not focusing.
Yes, she's not focusing. ممتاز. Let's back to just 1 minute number 3. Just wait. Yes, she's not. Well, she focused. يعني مبينة مركزة بس الانفايرومنت not safe. تحسون كأنها تلعب صح؟
يعني random move.
Yes, randomized. طيب number 4.
She's not.
This scene about 2 chemists in the lab with the wrong or the precaution that we can mention.
They are not wearing lab coats.
And she's
They
not
are-
focusing.
Yes, يا جود صح. They are not wearing the lab coat or the protective equipment, right, Sukaina? Second, as Jude said, she's not focusing, she's talking while she holding the tube, and she accidentally will spill out the liquid in the cylinder. ممتاز. What about 5?
بدون الآلة.
ماسك أو الحامل
لاب كوت.
أو بدون لاب كوت.
مكسور هذا.
ممتاز بدون لاب كوت without الهاندل التيوب هاندل مكسور. ممتاز. مين لاحظت المكسور؟
أنا.
ممتاز يا جود. broken beaker. This is the number 1 that we do in the lab. We check our equipment and our glassware before we start. ممتاز. So this is the exercise. Was interesting to do. Let's go back to the second part of the waste management, which is about waste and security. Just wait. Okay. So again, we will talk about waste management. We are in a part number 2 in our lecture, lesson 14 or lecture number 14. We're still in chemical management and security, and again تلاحظون أول 10 slides review أو مراجعة للبارت 1 للwaste management. فتذكير ب what we do while we are using the sink, الcost والsafety والenvironment protection are connected. Our goal from wasting the chemical is, of course, mainly to protect our environment. Disposing of chemical waste safely by not pouring the solution just when we are instructed to, because it will react with the metal and water with some cases of corrosive or explosive hazard chemical or solution. Also, never put a solid into a sink waste disposal costs money. That's why some companies didn't do it in a correct way, because it costs money to separate the chemical waste and to treat the waste in a right way. Waste handling and disposal. For most academic course, there are a set of guidelines will help you to do the basics of waste disposal and save money and times for stockrooms personnel. So the first rule is about follow the instruction. It's easy in the lab to be rushing to finish the thing and not focusing, as we see in the previous picture, but also be focused, clean, and put away the equipment, move to the next task, slowly organized in your experiment. Second, don't pour anything down to the sink unless you are an instructor too, especially the solid and the explosive liquid. Most waste will have a specific waste jar. Again, there are a container or can trash للfood and drink, can trash for glassware, للpaper. Just be aware about this container for waste in our lab. Again, anything that become contaminated with chemical, سواء كان paper أو sponges أو towels, just treated this paper or sponges separately. Ask your instructor what to do when your paper is has a spill of corrosive مثلا, or your sponge is full of flammable liquid. Don't mix waste unless specially told to do that. We know that we must separate الwaste. هذا الفيرست أو البداية عفوا، سواء كان بالتخزين، بالستورينج، بالكابينت، لاحظتوا separation is number one. Also بالwaste we have to separate الكيميكال أو الأسيد وما يكونون مع بعض, both are mixed. Again, broken glassware, we must dispose that and check that you have clean and not broken glassware. All the steps above assume that you know what the waste is. To be certain about this, all beaker, test tube, and other containers must always be identified at all times during an experiment with accurate label. For as a chemist, we have a responsibility for managing the chemical. We can see that before buying chemical, because before professional personnel in our department والlaboratory قبل طلب المواد الكيميائية, they have to check this list and be considered of this main part before we buy a chemical. We have to know what? First, the proper facility. Is this chemical can be handled and stored in any facilities or not? There are specific region. Second, hazardous substances. It is possible to substitute a less hazardous chemical before you order. ففي حال كان في طلب لمادة كيميائية عالية الخطورة on health hazard or environment hazard, if you have the choice to substitute your order with a less hazardous chemical, just do it. Minimize the use. Ask if it is possible to carry out the experiment using very small amount of this chemical. As we said, the less, the safest. فدائما نستخدم الاماونت من الكيميكال بقدر الحاجة أو بقدر ما نحتاجه في الاكسبيرمنت only. Because when we have extra amount or excess amount, what we do? We just dispose this extra amount, even if it is clean or not used. Sharing. Before you order, you should check to find out, is this available from another laboratory within the laboratory, the department or university? Before buying وطلب this chemical, check if there are a laboratory that having this material or chemical. So we minimize the chemical order as possible as we can. If we apply these safety principles to minimize the exposure, and the best way is to minimize the amount of chemical that we are ordering. So we will reduce the risk of handling and storing this chemical, and therefore the disposal أو طريقة التخلص منها. It is better to minimize your chemical order. Also, if you must order a sufficient amount of chemical, consider ordering for a small bottle rather than large one. This may cost more, but you will minimize the risk by handling smaller amount, and the storage will be at its best. Receiving chemicals. When we receive a chemical, it's ideal to check these tips. 1. Inspect the container to make sure it is intact. Receive and review the MSDS for this chemical. How can we ship? How can we transfer this chemical? All the MSDS or safety data sheet information. Second, check the date of the container or the bottle. Don't damage the original label on this chemical. Label the container with the owner's name. The person that ordered this, professional personnel that ordered this chemical, must be label its name on the bottle, because he is or she is responsible for the storage and handling for this chemical. Apply your institution special label. Some university have color code label to help recognize and sort various type of hazard. Enter the chemical into the inventory system, electronic system that you add or enter your information about. Transfer, transport, and the movement of chemical. How can we transfer the chemical? Handling chemicals at your institution, a shipping, a receiving department must have or may not have much education or understand of chemical، وتحديدا البرسونيل اللي ما يكونوا متخصصين أو محترفين بمجال نقل المواد الكيميائية. So if you are expecting the receipt of an especially hazardous material, you should alert this department. You may want to be involved in the transfer of this chemical to your laboratory or advise the receiving personnel about its safe handling and transfer. ففي حال كان في recipient أو شخص ليس ملم بالhazardous بالsafety procedure، مهم جدا to alert that person, this department, about this chemical and how can he handle it carefully. Handling hazardous waste that required a lot of documentation include when we have a hazardous waste in the lab, we must check this list. How long you can hold it before you must dispose it. Identify the content of this hazardous waste. إيش المكونات لهالhazardous waste, because it will help us to know if we can handle it extra time or no, it has to be wasted immediately. Packaging it for transport to its disposal site. Transporting to the disposal site. Disposing of the waste. Obtaining proof of final disposal. You have to take a proof that you dispose this chemical. So what's our responsibility as an undergraduate chemist in this introductory laboratory? The experiments that have been designed in advance to include steps to deal with hazardous waste, you are told exactly what to do with your waste. It's most often disposed or poured into a container, and the content of the waste are known and labeled. ففي حال تخلص من الهازردس أو الهازردس waste لازم تكون توضع في الكونتينر again السبيسيفيك الخاص فيها سواء كانت glassware أو liquid أو solid. Second, you have to label the waste with its content. So هذه النفايات الكيميائية مكونة من كذا وكذا وكذا. So hazardous waste cannot be disposed unless its contents are known. لازم نعرف waste content before we dispose it. لأن لكل waste ولكل نوع chemical طريقة تخلص مختلفة. فلو كان explosive solid مادة متفجرة solid بتخلص منها بطريقة غير الفلامبل liquid مثلا. It must be labeled, it must be known the content of this waste. You should know that if you are not accurate, you may be placing someone who handles your waste at risk, since waste is often processed so that it's combined. If something is not labeled correctly, the result will be seen as a reaction between the content when the waste is mixed and resulting risk or incident. فلو كانت المحتويات غير واضحة بيؤدي إلى المixing ل all the waste or all the chemical waste from this building, for example, and it will be react together and make incident لا سمح أو risk. What is the chemical security and what's the difference between chemical security and chemical safety? Lab safety prevent injury or injury to others, to you or others from the laboratory operation. This is the lab safety. إن نسعى دائما لنقلل من الانجري, الانسيدنت, الريسك باللاب environment. بينما lab security, what's about? It's about seeks to prevent injury to you or others by restricting access to very hazardous chemical, biological, and radiological material. Lab security is to prevent injury by restricting أو يحدد limiting access للhazardous chemical, biological or radiobiological material. That means by restricting access, we mean that only certain people have access to certain chemicals. These chemicals are secured in order to prevent easy access immediate access by other people that are not professional or legitimated to use this chemical. فهذا هو أمن اللاب أو أمن المعامل، إن فقط أشخاص محددين professional personnel that have the access to the chemical hazardous chemical biological radiological. Why? To prevent the injury قدر الإمكان. So since academic labs are generally open and not very secure, it is easy to a student to not think about the issue of security. You might reasonably expect that this should be more the responsibility of faculty and stockroom personnel. However, many faculty members are probably not very mindful of this since they have spent their lives in academic environment where security is not a matter of a great concern. فليس كل الأشخاص العاملين in this academic lab عندهم الوعي الكافي بالsecurity of the lab، إنه يكون الكيميكال والبيولوجيكال ماتيريال فقط يتم الدخول أو الأكسس لها بواسطة professional personnel. الstockroom personnel are responsible for that. وأيضا إحنا لدينا هذه المسؤولية أن نكون واعيين في الآن بعد الليكتشر أن نعلم أن الأكسس للكيميكال كابينت أو الكيميكال ستوك روم غرفة التحضير المواد الكيميائية are certain access for special personnel مثل الأستاذة فنية المعمل أو أشخاص متخصصين في الدخول لهذه الكابينت أو أماكن التخزين. this is الchemical security اللي ليس كل student أو كل الطالبات على علم فيها ويظنون إنه open والأكسس للكابينت أو للستورج عادي بأي وقت، لأن دائما المعمل مفتوح أو academic lab are generally open. But that is wrong. Now you have the aware that you know that there are certain personnel that are responsible for accessing this chemical, so we can limit the security issues as possible as we can if we share this knowledge. So thank you for your listening. We reached to the last of our lecture today. تحدثنا اليوم عن chemical management. We talk about how can we store a corrosive chemical by its cabinet, the special cabinet for the flammable and corrosive. It's all about protecting the environment. We talk about the appropriate waste disposal, separation, knowing the content of waste. Also, we distinguish between lab safety and lab security والفرق بين الاثنين. Any question؟ تفضلوا الآن في حال وجود أي سؤال.
ماس الأسايمنت أي يوم بيفتح؟
بإذن الله يا كوثر بيكون يوم الاثنين، بما أن انتهينا من المحتوى العملي فالأسبوع القادم إن شاء الله ما في ليكتشر، فبيكون يوم الاثنين وسيتاح من 4 مساء إلى 8 مساء.
تمام، شكرا، يعطيك العافية.
عفوا، وبنزل إعلان لكم يوم الأحد بكامل تفاصيل